Hello and welcome to Beginning, Middle, End, the podcast where we talk to creators and story lovers about storytelling. Laughter occurs in every society. Babies laugh, animals laugh. Humor releases physical and mental stress in the body and strengthens social bonds. A joke is one of the most compact and effective forms of storytelling. Why did the chicken cross the road? No one knows, but the road will have its vengeance. There's a beginning, the setup, the middle, which is the audience anticipation and expectation. Then there's the end, the punchline, which usually subverts that expectation. Complete story structure in 2 lines. I'm Shane, and stories are my favorite things in the world. Here to talk with me about it today is comedian John Wynn. This is comedian John Wynn, a college professor turned comedian with a charmingly skewed perspective. His quick wit and clever jokes have gotten him out of many awkward situations. For example, employment as a college professor. He was named Miami New Times' best comedian, a semifinalist in NBC's 2018 Stand Up for Diversity. You've seen him perform at places like the Laughing Skull Festival. John was even the Miami Dolphins' official comedian, though he was not as funny as their season record. He's an award-winning web series creator, but more impressively, he's been banned from many all-you-can-eat sushi restaurants. John, welcome to Beginning, Middle, End podcast.
What a great delivery, Shane. That was really good. It really felt natural, man. Thanks for doing that.
All right, so let's talk about story.
Yeah.
You craft stories and jokes for your web series, so what makes a good story?
I think tension is always good. Conflict. I'm sure you discussed that in other podcasts, but I think tension and then the release of that tension is what makes you react. And that could be hopefully in laughter, or it could be groaning, but there is some response, hopefully some response. And I think comedy is the hardest form of storytelling because it's so subjective, and what somebody may think is funny is not the same thing that someone else might think is funny. And so, but the problem is that comedy has a very definitive metric, laughter, right? The idea, the intention of comedy is to make people laugh. I mean, you know, some comics will say, I'm trying to entertain people. Yeah, well, singers do that. You know, singers, actors do that. Comedy, you're supposed to make people laugh. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the challenge, is that there's a definitive metric, but whether or not people actually adhere to that response of laughter, that's the challenge of it.
Is there something broken about comedians that they're always searching for that audience approval, that response?
I think so. I mean, you know, some people, you know, like Seinfeld in interviews will say, you know, he's pretty stable a childhood, but then, you know, another comedian said about Seinfeld, Bill Burr, I think, said about Seinfeld that Seinfeld is probably the angriest person in the world. Like who goes into the minutia of a Q-tip, or you know what I mean, or taking a shower and gets so angry. You know, they say that some, you know, good comedy is about complaining. You're complaining and you're finding the absurdity of this particular subject or whatever. And then, you know, that's where you're creating the tension, hopefully.
So you're the first comedian on the show, and I find many things interesting about stand-up from a story perspective. You know, comedy sets are in a way a story. There's a lot of times a beginning, middle, and end. Some comedians even have literally translated their sets into television shows.
Right.
Rami Youssef, you mentioned Seinfeld, Bill Cosby. I don't know if we have to say disgraced comedian Bill Cosby now.
Well, I don't think any. I mean, you're right. His comedy sets were, that's basis for that show, sure.
Yeah. And even on a micro level, I talked in the intro about how a joke is a complete story.
Yeah.
So how do you craft your jokes?
I mean, you know, it's just about finding that subject, that topic that you want to talk about, and then finding that emotion that you have connected to it. It doesn't matter if the audience really, you know, feels the same way, but as long as they understand your perspective on that your feeling on that particular subject, and then that's the issue. I mean, that's the challenge, is just writing punchlines, just writing as many things that you think could be funny about that particular setup or situation, and then I mean, you don't know. Again, you don't know. So that's the challenge. You have to go up. You have to do the joke. And, where are you going to do that? Where are you going to do the joke at? You got to do it like at a bar. And then are people really listening? And are people really, and so I think situationally can also influence the joke itself, like the way the joke works for an audience or doesn't work for an audience. So that's usually what I usually do is I try to come up with a punchline usually. I sometimes work things backwards, I kind of reverse engineer things sometimes. But you're writing a lot of punchlines, at least I am, and trying to figure out which one works, which one sounds better, which is a funnier word, that kind of thing.
Do you ever look at other comedians and kind of deconstruct what they're doing?
Yeah, I think when you're first starting, so I've been doing it, over 10 years, but when you're first starting, they always say you're sounding like, who do you admire? Who do you study? Who did you, and so a lot of comics, you're trying to figure out what you're trying to do. You don't know, I think, Seinfeld said it again, bringing up Seinfeld, that, your age in comedy, your experience in comedy is like your age in life. So if you're 1 year in the comedy, you're a baby, and so, you're 1 year old. And so if you're, I've been doing it 12 years, so I'm kind of beginning to figure it out, but I still don't know exactly. I always sabotage myself. I find a way to sabotage myself a lot. So, the crowd might be really enjoying the show, and then all of a sudden I'll do a joke that I like a lot that I'm still figuring out, but it's like maybe too dirty or too raunchy, and then I'll definitely then the crowd will turn on me.
Yeah. So that's one thing I definitely find interesting about stand-up is how the audience really participates in the development of material. You don't really have that in any other medium. In TV and film, the script is set. Actors can improvise some lines in their execution. Theater has a little bit of, you can react to the audience, but the written word is pretty sacred. I think stand-up's very unique in that, your jokes can change over time. Your order of your set, everything is being developed live with the participation of the audience. I watched that Expecting Amy documentary on HBO about Amy Schumer developing her set. While she was also developing her baby.
Yeah.
And, that really kind of lifted the curtain on that kind of process. Talk about the audience participation and how it helps you, hinders you.
I think, so again, it's one of those things where the definitive response, the definitive metric is that the laughter. And so I think if you are, again, situationally, there's a great book, I forget the name of the author, but he said there's 3 things to think about when thinking about stand-up comedy. And I think he used the term like MAP, M-A-P, M, material, A, audience, and P, performance. And of those things, you can only control 2 of those as a comedian. You can only control the material. You can only control your performance. You can never control the audience, right? And so situationally, you have to learn how to develop those skills so that you can write strong enough material and perform it in a strong enough way that you can siphon whatever you can, from the audience in terms of that. But some comics, like Seinfeld, again, believes that an audience will help edit your jokes for you, right? If the crowd doesn't respond, it's helping you edit. You're editing your material the next time. I mean, you have to kind of live with the bomb of that joke or whatever, that silence. But if a crowd is really great, you can now try out other jokes. You can add tags, so we call it tags, to certain jokes and keep building on the punchline. And so, the audience can decide for you, and again, there's this, there is this little bit of a conflict for me personally between artistry. I mean, I'm now beginning to look at this as art. This is a challenging art. It is performing. It is writing. It is directing. It's, what I mean? And do you want to please? I mean, part of people. There's a lot of people pleasing in comedy, right? Comedians, I think. But do you want to always adhere to that every time you perform? Which could be in the, thousands of hours of doing performances. I don't know, right? I find that's why I find myself sometimes challenging the audience with what I think is funny, and then I'll comment on it, and sometimes that'll get a bigger laugh than the joke. But I think that's important because you are interacting. You're right. You're not just up there doing. But I have worked with comics, like cruise ship comics, who they have an act. They have the same act. They've been doing the same act for years. And again, not to demean or denigrate cruise ship comics at all, but I think there's just you have a new audience every week, so you can kind of fall back on the same material and not again, not all of them, but you're not forced to try to generate new material. So you see some of these guys are kind of doing it by rote, you know what I mean? They're just kind of the same thing. So, I don't know. It's kind of tough to jump between those. But I think the audience, that's what makes it fun, is that it's live, it's live. You kind of Zoom was the worst thing I thought for comedy. I mean, it was like, it's like this is what it looks like, Zoom comedy. And you can't see anybody. You can't interact with anybody. I mean, it's a very human connection. I mean, theater is great too, right? But they are doing like you said, it's a rehearsed thing, and it's cool to see that happening live. And there is certain emotions that come with it. But comedy is loose. I mean, it's fun, and or it can be fun. It depends, I guess, on the comedian you're seeing and the audience that you're getting. And so yeah, I don't know, man. I definitely felt like since I started in Florida, and then when I moved to Los Angeles, I did find myself kind of self-editing more, I don't want to say censoring, that's too strong of a word, but definitely editing my material to kind of fit in more with the audiences here. And then when I go on the road to Oklahoma or something like that, they don't care, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? So I don't know, it's the catch-22 of it, I suppose. But the audience definitely, I think for me, I still want to make them laugh. There's still that's the overwhelming motivation there for me. It's just like I want to make them laugh, whatever it takes to do that, without being like hacky or stealing jokes or whatever.
Is the first bomb the worst? Are they all bad? Are there some worse than others?
It's like the first one I think has got to be the worst. I mean, I don't know if people are aware when they bomb, but I'm like hypercritical. I'm a very hypercritical person. I think that just comes from my Asian upbringing, being very critical of myself. The first time I bombed, I ate it so bad. Like it was disaster, man. It's okay to tell it what happened? Is that all right to tell what happened? Okay. So this is maybe my third time on stage. So I started in Miami. So I drove to Boca Raton, which is like 45 minutes away. There was an open mic on a Wednesday night at this place called the Funky Buddha, right? It's like like a bar, hookah bar, and all arts. I didn't know anything about it. I always thought of comedy, comedy clubs, and I did the one bar. I was like, oh, it's cool. This is going to be, so very artsy, right? And I go there with another comic, and we get there, and there's a list. You're supposed to sign up on this list. And oh man, we get there like at 10 o'clock at night and sign the list. So it's like, oh, we're going up at like 1:30 in the morning. And I'm thinking of my jokes. I'm like very memorized. And this kid goes up to do poetry, and it's like some of the best poetry I've ever heard in my life.
So it's not just comedy night.
No, right? It's music, poetry, spoken word. And I, wasn't into that scene. And I see this kid do poetry, right? And I hear like women sniffling, like they're like moved, they're crying, they're emotionally moved. I was like, oh my God, this is like so good. Like he's talking about like his struggle and in life, and then he gets off, stage like, hey, coming to the stage is John Wynn, you know what I mean? And so like everybody's like very sad, like very, crying. And I get up there and I forget the punchline to my first joke. And I just go, oh, and I just, dropped the F-bomb, and I was like, and I just started freaking. I mean, I total collapse. And then I did one more joke. I kind of, I was like, I did a joke, and I got kind of a tepid. People are gone now. It's like 1:30 in the morning. It's like 4 people. And, and you just think, oh, I'm just going to do the jokes. People are going to laugh, joke. But no, right? There's no interaction. I didn't think about the interaction. And this guy I can still remember his what he looked like to this day. He looked like the teacher in Beavis and Butthead, like with the long blonde hair and like the glasses and like a goatee. If I ever see that guy, and I did one joke, and then he goes, "Well, I'm still up there." He goes, "Hey, you're like George Costanza." Seinfeld's been off the air for like 10 years now at this point. I go, "What?" I'm like, George Costanza. This is my first audience interaction. I'm like, "What?" I'm like, George Costanza. He goes, "Yeah, you only got one good joke." I was like, "Okay." I don't even know what that means, man, but okay. And so I did my set, and I get off stage, and so the other comic who's with me, he doesn't do well, either. But it was amazing to me on the drive back. Like, there's a delusion in comedy, right? There's delusion,
right. Are you questioning your life choices at that point?
Yeah, you have to tell yourself you're funny, so you go up and do it again and chase that high that you got, whatever that first. It's like a drug addiction almost, right? You're trying to get back on stage to get that high. But I just remember driving home, and it's like it's 2 a.m. now. I was just like, oh yeah, man, we'll just pull into a ditch right here. I'm cool with that. I'm cool with just driving. You see those 2 lights? I'm just gonna go ahead and weave right into traffic here. But I just remember the guy next to me was like, how do you think I did? I was like, are you kidding me? It's like 2 people there. It was terrible. That's good? I mean, what are you talking about? So, I mean, that first bomb was pretty bad. I mean, and then my first year in comedy, I went in and out a lot. Like I went in and out of comedy a lot because performing was not my thing. Like writing was my thing. I like writing. I like writing scripts, and I like writing jokes, but performing wasn't my thing. And then so kind of the next year, I just forced myself to perform, like, go up and just talk a little bit and just stand there and not have jokes. And I'd ask to go very late at night when there's only like a few people, where it's even more awkward a little bit. So you can kind of just get through those nerves. And then by my third year, I kind of put them together pretty well, like performing. And so I just became looser in the performing. So, I mean, an audience helped a lot. They call it crowd work. You're just doing crowd work. You're talking to, there's some comics who are amazing at crowd work. Like if you ever get a chance to see a guy by the name of Ian Bagg, he's to me one of the best. I mean, he's a great comic. He's a great comedian. He's a super nice person too, but one of the best crowd work comics. I mean, I don't. It's like amazing to watch someone be that fast and quick, and it's so funny,
So speaking of audiences and stand-up comedians that I probably have never heard of, streaming seems to be expanding stand-up to a wider audience.
Yeah.
Netflix in particular, they've really helped propel people like Nate Bargatze, Ali Wong, Hannah Gadsby. Even got Dave Chappelle out of retirement.
Right.
Are we in a new golden age of stand-up with Netflix? How do you think streaming is affecting things?
I have a kind of a mixed feeling about that. I think, the thing that has happened, over, and with films too, right? It's like the democratizing of art, right? I mean, anybody could record themselves doing an hour of comedy and put it on YouTube if they wanted to, right? And there have been very great comedians who have done that. Sam Morril, I think Joe List did it. I mean, these are comics who are very, in my opinion, very funny, very talented, and they bypassed Netflix. They bypassed to go right to their fans, which I think is a great thing to do. But I think Netflix, which is still like the ultimate, right? You want that Netflix special. But I think they did inundate the market. There was a couple of years there where they were doing like 15-minute specials. And it felt like they were looking for not the funniest comedians, but some of the certain roles and categories. So in that regard, it's challenging because with the democratization of art, right? Like this art form, same with filmmaking, is that there is a removal of the gatekeeper, if you will, right? In the industry, the gatekeeper. But when Netflix kind of inundates the market, they still are the gatekeepers, right? And so now it's just a different gatekeeper, right? It's not like advertisers on television, or you're trying to get on the Tonight Show or Conan or Letterman. You are now trying to get into the good graces of Netflix, right? I mean, and so I don't know. I mean, I think though, like with Netflix, you have people like, I don't know if you saw this most recent Bo Burnham special called Inside. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, it's if you begin to look at stand-up comedy as art, it pushes towards that argument. You know what I mean? If you look at stand-up comedy as just being, hey, a guy standing on stage telling jokes, then obviously it's antithetical to that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know, man. I think streaming's good. I think streaming's bad. I think I don't know if it'll ever happen, but there is the fear, of course, that people will not go to live events, right? And so that's the challenge. That's why I thought Zoom was so bad. I mean, I'm hearing people have conversations about paying their bills or like getting ice from the ice machine. But you can't see them. I can't see them to address them, right? You can't interact. So it was like streaming for them. Right. And when you're watching streaming, I'm on my phone. I'm watching, watching Disney Plus, but I'm also on my phone. Right.
Did you get heckled on a Zoom?
I did not get heckled on Zoom. I had one guy who got mad at a joke that I did, that he was a comic. And so I always, I don't know. I just get really mad at comics who get mad at other comics' jokes. That infuriates me the most. I don't know. I mean, I get, if you feel, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to say anything.
Okay. You want to name him?
No, I don't even remember his name. I don't remember his name. I just know he didn't like a joke. Listen, Shane, Asians don't have like a real Martin Luther King Jr. You know what I mean? We have Martin Luther King Jr. Great, right? But we don't have an Asian person that we can use. Like people like to use like Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee is like, also, I got called Bruce Lee in high school. It wasn't a compliment. You know what I mean? It's like amazing. They're like, oh, you do karate and stuff. So it's like the stereotype is also like an insult to us. So that was kind of the thing I was trying to talk about in this joke, and I don't know. He didn't care for it.
Well, that segues perfectly into my next question. There's lots of labels for Asians, and you know that from growing up in Texas. I know that from growing up in Alabama.
Yeah,
there's smart Asians, right? Squinty-eyed, bucktooth Asians from the Bugs Bunny cartoons, Tiger Moms, Crazy Rich Asians, the model minority. You've given yourself a label, the funny Asian. So talk about how you came up with that and why.
So that was like, right when Facebook started. I don't know if people remember, it just kind of emerged one day, Facebook. And I grabbed it and I bought my own website. I grabbed that website too, The Funny Asian. And of course, I wish I didn't put the in front of it, right? But I also, I didn't call myself the funniest Asian, right? I'm just saying the funny Asian, who you're happy to see, at this one particular moment at time. And maybe there's other Asians on the show. But when I started, I was in Miami, so there was maybe one or two other Asian guys doing comedy.
Yeah.
And so I just grabbed that handle, the funny Asian. So now it's too late. I can't change it. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? Once you call yourself McDonald's and you've been doing it for 50, 60 years, you can't all of a sudden call yourself, Big Mac City. You know what I mean? Yeah. You can't change it all of a sudden, right? So it is the handle I have. I'm proud of it. I'm okay with it. I don't think I'm taking away from anybody. I don't think I'm, because there's so many, I mean, it's so diverse now. I mean, in terms of comedy, I mean, the world, I mean, it's amazing, right? You do in a decade, you can see the changes that are occurring with racial equality. I mean, it's not there yet, but it's happening, right? You can actually see it happening. Last year was a major push. And I just find though that like, the gatekeepers of like Hollywood and things like that, right? If we, just to talk about in that particular part of the industry, I mean, they can always, they could have always chosen, how they wanted to represent people. I mean, to be honest, you know what I mean? They could have always done that, and Hollywood has deliberately done that, like in the 1960s when Warner Brothers released Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. that's a deliberate interracial, showing a black man and a white woman getting married, and the parents, both parents, are reacting in a negative way, and then Spencer Tracy giving the great speech about love and what that means, and that's deliberate. That's Hollywood choosing to finance and promote this movie that is talking about equality. And Hollywood has always done this. They, Philadelphia, when the movie Philadelphia about HIV and AIDS came out, you're choosing, hey, the next door neighbor guy, Tom Hanks, the most affable character, and they're also making him gay. Like, he didn't just get it from a blood transfusion; he's gay. And then the attorney who's helping him is Denzel Washington, who sometimes in the black communities, the stigma of homosexuality, right? So why can't they do it with Asian people? Why does it always have to be? Why does it have to be model minority? Why does it have to be, there's a little bit of, it's hypocrisy. Who's the lady, Linda Hunt, right? In 1982, she's playing a Chinese guy, a woman is playing, but that's not part of the, it's not like a character is going through a transition or anything like that. It's a man, but they hired a woman to play the Chinese guy. There's a billion Chinese people. You can find one actor out of that whole bunch to play. You can hire a white woman, but
it's because somebody didn't label themselves the acting Asian. That would have been the easy.
That's a good idea. Has someone done that? The acting Asian? That's good. I should have taken that one. That's a good one. You see, you should be writing for me.
You also spoken in the past about being mistaken for Mexican or some other minorities. Was labeling yourself a way to kind of let people know at the head that you are Asian?
No one brings me up as the funny Asian. No one ever says that. I always just think, though, it's something I address right away. I definitely have, it's changed over time, but people still come up to me. Recently, like, a dude came up to me and he was like, "Oh, you're not Asian?" Yeah, I just did like 20 minutes. I just explained I'm not. I look like Guatemalan, but I'm not Asian. He's like, "Oh man, you really look like my uncle from Peru," or I'm like, okay, that's the point of that's the joke I'm trying to make. But like, I don't know, man. I don't know what to expect. But yeah, I never tell people to call me the funny Asian. It's just the website I grabbed. You can go to johnwyncomedy.com and that'll also link you back to the funny Asian. But I never use that one. The funny Asians, it's just more fun.
Now, there's also a lot of anger directed at the Asian community right now because of the coronavirus connections to Wuhan. Some political leader statements that were made. How is that affecting your comedy in terms of what you're allowed to make fun of or what you feel like making fun of, but also in terms of how audiences are reacting to you?
Yeah. All right. So I have I have two mindsets. So I have been doing a joke, and this is I don't want to get in trouble. But I start off and go, "Hey, I'm Vietnamese," So I tell people that so I don't get blamed for last year, right? So some people, I'm like, "Hey, don't hit me." That's essentially what I tell people, right? So. I don't know. I have a little bit, darker sense of humor. But I definitely have done that joke, and people have, grown like, "Oh, how dare you?" But I'm just kind of like, that's the truth. I want people to know I'm Vietnamese because I'm getting beat up. Everyone getting beat up. So I definitely talk about race because that's what I know. That's my perspective on it. But I also, grew up for most of my life in America and, grew up in small towns, though. So I have a different perspective. I didn't grow up in a Vietnamese community. I was like one of 3 Asian students in my entire high school, in the entire school. In Waco, Texas, I was one of 3, right? And
so not just America, but the South.
Yeah, and so it wasn't like, I see these kids. I'm like, oh yeah, I grew up in San Francisco. I'm like, oh yeah, you have a very rich culture. You're there with your community and your people, but I didn't get that experience. So I'm telling jokes from my perspective, my experience. But I did have like a woman like get mad at me one time. She was like, you shouldn't make those jokes. It's perpetuating racism. I was like, oh yeah, I think a white woman telling me what jokes I can do is a little bit more white supremacy than my jokes. I feel like context. You're walking into a place that says comedy club. It doesn't say your type of comedy club. It just says comedy club. So that's the subjective element. And if you don't like it, you can go to the bathroom, go to the bar, get a drink, go take a smoke break, or whatever. But I think the social media and things like that. People, and I don't believe in cancel culture, but I do believe in context culture, right? Like if I'm at a grocery store and I start yelling stuff about, hey, don't hit me, someone should punch me in the face, right? A Chinese person should just beat me up. But if I'm in a comedy club and I say it, I don't think I'm necessarily in the wrong, because a lot of comedy is lying, hyperbole. Right? It's looking for a reaction, like I said earlier, and so you're going to say something that will try to elicit reaction. And I'm not just talking about race jokes. I'm not,
Yeah.
there's a line there, right? I mean, but I think with sexual joke. I mean, some people say some amazingly, whoa, like that's gross or disgusting, but that's for me. That's to me, it feels that way. It doesn't mean that's how everybody feels. It's like, you brought up Bill Cosby. I mean, he used to chastise a lot. Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy talks about it. He would tell him not to use foul language, and look, look at what happened. I mean, just because you don't use foul language doesn't mean that your moral character is defined, in any way like that. So, yeah, man, I think it's a great question. I mean, the race thing. I mean, it's and I think now, but I don't know. I think it. I don't look at it that way. I just look at comedians. We're doing comedy. It's very challenging already, and so you're doing the comedy you're talking about your perspective from your vantage point. So
Yeah, and you talked about that the creation of tension to be released as laughter, and a lot of comedians, a way to create that tension is to talk about uncomfortable things, whether it be race or sex or whatever. So it's almost inherent to what you're trying to do is to create tension. You have to make people uncomfortable. You have to kind of subvert people's expectations of what you're going to say.
Yeah, I think it depends on the comic, right? Like, so Seinfeld and Jim Gaffigan, I probably would say, that they can take, and again, not a knock on their comedy. I mean, more impressive to me actually, but they can take something like a Q-tip and break it down to where it's so funny, and it's you analyze it and the use of the Q-tip. Or Jim Gaffigan has a great thing on bowling. He talks about bowling for like 5 minutes. It's very funny the way he breaks it down. It's sarcastic, and he's offering this point of view. And so I don't necessarily think it has to be subversive or topics that are off limit, but I definitely think your approach to the topic, right? That is what's going to be, they usually say, hey, when you talk about a topic in comedy, how do you feel about it? I hate bowling. Now, maybe you're not going to say the words hate, but bowling is stupid. You're going to give that emotional thing, and then you're going to explain why it's stupid, right? And then hopefully you have a punchline, right? And so that's why people, but I think sometimes comics are saying things that people are thinking, but they don't know how to articulate it, right? So like, yeah, bowling is stupid. You know what I mean? But this guy found a way to talk about all of the reasons why it's dumb. You know what I mean?
Right.
He goes all the way from the size of the balls, the holes in the ball. It's like very funny. Like the little air thing, and he's really broken it down, right? It's like, if you have if you're able to eat nachos while you're doing a sport, that's not a sport. I mean, it's he's broken it down so thoroughly. And, it's not something I can, I just don't like bowling, but he's found a way to articulate it, and I think comics try to do that. And I think every, always switches. Styles of comedy switch. There's absurd style. There's one-liners. Lately, last few years, it's more of like a storytelling comic. So not necessarily the funniest punchlines, but they're being honest, I guess. And that's the kind of thing I don't like. That's kind of like, I don't like that, because that kind of goes into like spoken word, I think, for me. Because it's not, it's cool, compelling stories for sure, but like, it's not stand up. Stand up is different, I think.
Yeah. I know Steve Martin was playing with that a little bit too. Once he got further into stand up, he had this idea about what happens if you don't let the audience release tension.
All
So
right.
what if I don't put in punchlines? He had like the arrow on his head
Yeah.
and would just say crazy things, but not necessarily have a punchline. Does the audience then create their own release points
Right.
during the show? So yeah, it's an interesting, but it seems like probably a harder way to go about things than just trying to write jokes. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he's so unique at in that time when he was coming up. But yeah, I mean, it is definitely, yeah, I know everybody has their own thing, but I think, again, that's what I think, styles change, and I think Hollywood pushes the style that they want to see. I mean, if you watch America's Got Talent, right? I mean, they're essentially, they're putting that story on there. They're putting a comedian that has that story, and they're pushing that story. And it's really not about the jokes; it's about the person, which is great. And again, I think that's great. But I don't know, man. I like to think of the world in a vacuum, and I'd like to think of it as just like, hey, I'm on a stage in a comedy club, not at not on TV, on a comedy club with a crowd that has to buy 2 drinks, and we're gonna make fun of stuff. You know what I mean? Whatever that may be. But it's meant to be fun. It's meant to be fun, right? It's meant to be fun. So I don't know, man. I don't know if I have any of the answers that answer your questions about writing, but I definitely think that what I said earlier. It's just, there's a definitive metric for comedy, laughter, and so I think Hollywood is, some of the Netflix specials. They kind of have been pushing younger comics who they have an identity which makes them unique, and they'll probably be on TV shows and have a sitcom for them. But I don't know. I'm trying to incorporate my identity into my jokes, if that makes sense, and
Yeah.
sometimes not trying to put my identity in the jokes, talking about marriage and talking about relationships, and that doesn't have to necessarily be about my race or identity.
So let's end today with your best piece of storytelling advice, and it doesn't have to be about comedy or humor. Just in general, what's your best piece of storytelling advice?
I think you just have to be disciplined. I mean, I hate this. Sounds very Asian, right? Like you have to be very, but I think even, writing can occur in your car while you're driving. You can occur in the shower, right? You're thinking of ideas. I think just thinking of your story is writing. And in terms of storytelling, I mean, I'm a big believer of writing first. I mean, writing is the storytelling to me. And I think because nowadays you have so many, your phones can just record, the memos. You're in traffic, you have ideas, you can just talk into your phone. And you can, get one of those things that doesn't make it look like you're crazy talking to yourself or whatever. We have an earpiece or whatever and just talking, but you have the ability to do it, but you have to do it. You have to do it every day. I teach a screenwriting class, and it is just about even when you're not feeling creative, just typing or writing, something, journaling, it's something. And then over time, you're going to figure out the story you're telling, right? I mean, you're going to figure that out. But, once you keep doing it every day, then you can find all the pieces. But I think storytelling, you need to have that conflict. But there's no conflict if you don't write at all. I mean, nothing will be produced. So you have to produce something. You have to write a little bit. So write every day.
Get it written.
Yeah, or talk. I mean, just think about it. Talk it through every day. 20 minutes. Think about your story. Think about your ideas. And yeah, it may not be 20 minutes, at one time. 10 minutes here, 2 minutes here. But just take time to think about it and write it down, jot it down, record it. And yeah, I think that's the best way to begin to create stories to tell. And then performance-wise, I don't know if that's what you're into, but you're talking about scripts and screenplays and comic books and things like that. So I don't know, that doesn't apply, but you gotta sit down and write. That's the nexus right there.
All right. Well, thanks for chatting with me today. That was probably the least funny talk about comedy that we could have.
What are you talking about, man? That was hilarious, dude. Because you told me it was going to be 20 minutes.
Yeah, now we're at 40.
Yeah,
So
terrible.
catch John Wynn, a.k.a. the Funny Asian stand-up schedule at thefunnyasian.com and go see his show.
Thanks. Great. Great. Really enthusiastic there, Shane. That's really appreciate that. I'm sure they'll be clamoring. The tickets will all be sold out based on that enthusiastic endorsement.
You're still here? I didn't think you'd make it this far. Like, comment, subscribe.